morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Angel Vasquez. I am here with another episode of Between Bulls and Bears. I am joined by the absolute pinnacle of business, our very own Professor Dr. Maya Bird-Stewart.
And I'll take it. I absolutely will accept that. You know, being a business major and the doctor of business, I like to think of myself as the quintessential chick of Wall Street, right? You know, when I think about stocks and bonds and bulls and bears, I see me. So thank you, Angel. I'll take that.
And on my other side, I have Yinka Majekodumi. Yinka, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to this topic on this podcast, Bulls and Bears, talking about credit. It's going to be fun.
Yes.
It's going to be exciting. Looking forward to it.
Yes, so am I.
We're talking credit today, folks. We're talking building credit. We're talking maintaining credit, repairing credit if you slack a little bit on
and what happens when you have bad credit.
Exactly. As well as the usage of credit for young people, especially because we don't always learn about credit. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to start this off by asking Yinka, Dr. Burt, if you can explain quickly what is credit and what is its usage?
I'll let Inka take that part, and I'm just going to, but I want the two of us, before we opened up, Inka and I talked about how years ago, that credit cards used to just come to your house ready to go. So we'll pick up on that, but I'll let Inka.
The good old days or the bad old days, depends on who you ask.
The good old days, and the bad old days,
right. So you ask, what is credit? Mm-hmm. Well, how did we get here, first of all, right? Mm-hmm. Let's take it back, right? Mm-hmm. Credit. Credit has existed forever, right? From ancient times to modern times, right? Buying things and not paying for them up front has always existed. But for purposes of modern day credit, we mostly refer to credit cards, right? I think that's the biggest consumer credit mechanism that we have today, credit cards. So I'll take it to that historical starting point. And when did we start? This happened by accident in 1950. Right, a gentleman named Frank McNamara went to dinner in New York, about 1950, and he had a great dinner with his friend, a business partner, and he had no cash. He forgot his cash at home. And that birthed the idea of Diners Club. If you're old enough to remember Diners Club, you probably don't know Diners Club, Angel. Oh, my God. And Diners Club, I think they still exist, by the way. Diners Club,
some of them do. Yeah,
credit card is and was a major credit card at some point in this country.
The blue and white logo.
Yes, it still exists, I think. So he created Diners Club, which was really a cardboard card for people to use when they go eat, and they don't have to pay cash, because back then, you had to carry cash. And that was the origin of credit cards from a consumer product. Ironically, that starts in 1950, right? 1956.
Oh, boy.
An incredibly intelligent man, Isaac Fair, and another partner, a mathematician and engineer, created an algorithm, right, to create credit scoring. Because, again, there was no real model back then. So this is 1956. Obviously, if you start credit cards, you got to measure credit at some point. So you could go back and look and you say, okay, Bill Fair came about, an engineer, and a mathematician, Earl Isaac, started this algorithm to create a credit scoring system that was fair. Okay. Because we're talking about 1956, right? Everybody was not treated equally.
Right.
They were trying to create something that was fair. So think, irony, Fair, right? So Mr. Fair and Mr. Isaac had this company called Fair, Isaac & Co., FICO.
Okay.
To create what we now know
the FICO
later,
score.
FICO score.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the origin of our relationship with credit. It goes way back further before these two tools. But for consumerism and consumer credit, those are the two origin points that you could say, let's point at these 2 points, and that's how we started. That's how we got here.
Interesting.
Got it. Wow.
Dr. Burt?
Now, that part I didn't know about the two gentlemen and the FICO score. But, of course, I know about a FICO score. And, again, I talk about if I would have known then what I know now when it comes to credit. Amazing. Just amazing. We were sharing with you, Angel, the fact that today, because of changed law, because of laws that changed years ago, today credit card companies are not allowed to send out the credit card that they used to send to our doors. We talk about debt, college really being, the number one starting point for debt and bad debt. The start of bad debt, certainly for most college kids and young people, right? College being the origins of where that bad debt started, because they would send us credit cards with our names on it, ready to go. All we had to do was call and activate, and those $1,000 were popped off, and in a week or less, right? $1,000,
23% interest.
Oh my God! So, I hope I answered the question.
Of course.
Okay.
Please. Okay. It's good that you guys mentioned this, because one, I did not know the history of credit was that. I didn't know it dated back. What are we talking now? 74 years?
Yeah, longer, but from a consumer standpoint,
Yes.
So it's good to know that bit of history behind it.
Yeah.
And, it's good to know, well, back then how they used to operate, because, I'm used to, you got to send a pre-approval in quotations through the mail, and now you got to go through some website, or you got to call a phone number to activate and to see if you
guys are
qualify.
Fancy. It's fancy today. It's so fancy today.
Too many steps nowadays.
But those steps are it's advancement compared to back in the day.
Yes.
Even though they would send the credit card directly to the house, if you had not received a credit card sent to you in the mail, you had to go and get the paper and fill out the long page and write all your name and write all your employers down and write down like it was. So while it seems cumbersome today, it's actually fancy today.
Very fancy.
Yeah. That's good to know.
But it's there to protect, right? Because they're trying to protect the youth and protect the innocent in some ways, right? To put these steps in there, because back then, if they did back then when they mailed you the credit card to your house and you had to call the number and activate it, someone got hold of your credit card of that mail, you have a problem, right?
Yeah. But let's be clear. Let's be clear on the protecting. It's not necessarily that the credit card companies are trying to protect. We have laws. Our government puts laws in place that helps, because the credit card company will send.
Exactly. They don't care.
And abuse.
Yes.
So,
and now that we have this, this bit of history, this bit of perspective to credit, where it comes from, how it was created, I want to ask, how do you build credit? Because we always hear, at least for my age, we always hear, you apply for a bank, right? They give you a credit limit, maybe $500, maybe $1,000, so forth. You spend it, and then you pay it back.
So, it's interesting. You all will get to learn a little something about me today. I'm usually private. I'll tell everybody else's business, not mine. But today I'm going to be very transparent. And it's so interesting. I remember, Angel, I went into the military on my 18th birthday. So, I was a young soldier, right? And I, at some point, ended up marrying. And I remember at 20, when I married, I was stationed at Fort Gordon in Georgia. And I remember my husband, we had gone over, we were in Korea, had been stationed there. We came back to the U.S. This is before we went to war. And I remember we married. And so, I was 20. My husband at the time was 24. And we needed to start, building credit. We moved off post, the military installation into the civilian world. And so we needed furniture, we needed, beds, and I remember going to furniture stores and going to stores and applying for credit so that I could buy furniture. And I remember everyone turning me down. Wow. And I remember going home one day, back to the barracks with my, or our apartment with my husband one day. And I remember crying and just saying, they keep saying, you got to have credit in order to get, something, but they won't give me credit. I remember like it was yesterday. I was 20 years old, maybe 21, but 20 years old. And I remember just going back home. We had gone to, some of the furniture stores out in the community, and we had applied, and we were constantly being denied credit. And everyone would say the same thing. Well, if you had credit, we could give you. And I just remember at one point, like, if y'all don't give me credit, I'm never going to have credit. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, I prayed hard enough and God saw fit to show me favor. And so at some point, I remember going to get a car, right? We were in the same unit together. We were stationed together. We were together. So we had one car. And I remember, we were always stuck with each other because of the one car. And I remember going down to Toyota it was Toyota of Augusta, Georgia. And I'd gone and I had applied for credit to get a car, and they gave me the car. And it seemed like that was the beginning of buying the credit. That was my first credit. Okay. The car, this Toyota Celica. I think it was about I was stationed there in 80. I was stationed there in 90, so it was like a 90, 91 Toyota Celica. Wow. Okay. That's where I got the credit, and that's what started, the uphill slash downhill. Right. Ultimately, the uphill and then the downhill, and thank God I'm back on the uphill. So credit is, it's a strange thing when you talk about credit. And I said, if I knew then what I know now, I'll be transparent. I had a bankruptcy at the age of 24 because credit, right? They were giving, when I got the car and they just started giving and they had no clue as to what they were giving to a fool. They had no clue. They had no clue. And I remember my husband and I think in 1994, so I was 24 then, my husband was 28, and we ended up filing bankruptcy. 24 and 28, over $100,000 in debt. Wow. Yeah. Wow. And then we were military. So everyone gives a soldier because we're military. They know we got a steady paycheck. You're supposedly credible. So credit has been very, credit has been something in my life. And so, at 53, almost 54, having a business for the last 20 plus years, it's now good. It's now good. And so I have a business wherein we can go and get anything. I can go and pretty much buy anything.
So you've seen the good side and the bad side of credit.
I know the good side and I know the bad side of credit. And I know now, though, even now I know if I screw up, I can be on the bad side fairly quickly. Real quick, I'll say to us, so I sit on different boards. I sit on a particular board. It's a money board, right, where the organization gives money, lends money to small businesses. And since COVID, we're getting an influx of applications in for small businesses needing loans. And we're finding that there are so many businesses that have bad credit, that have 500 and 600 scores because of COVID, because of the, COVID shut everything down. Well, when it shut you down, you weren't able to make money. But we also found that, they would share documents with us, reports with us that showed before COVID, they had exceptional credit. Wow. And so I say that to say, while I'm on the upside of credit, the market could, bring about a shift for me anytime. As it did, those businesses at any time.
Good point. Very anytime. Good point.
And I like that you mentioned that, because so I'm seeing two perspectives of it, right? So you have the individual credit, right? You want to buy your car, which is very common when you're young. You don't want to rely on your parent and have to use their vehicle. Because in the back of your mind, you're like, man, I don't want to crash the vehicle. That insurance is going to kill me.
Yes.
And at the same time, on a corporate perspective, credit is such a big factor.
Absolutely.
And for small businesses that don't, have, or they don't generate the sales to cover being able to replenish inventory or being to invest and expand themselves, the application and the usage and building their credit is it's a very major factor. So now I want to discuss real quick, Yinka, how do you, now that we know you can build credit, right? How do you maintain it? And in the off chance, as Dr. Bird, as you mentioned, COVID brought the issue where businesses couldn't sell and their FICO scores tanked horribly.
Yes.
In
the off chance that a company's FICO score, or maybe even the individual's FICO score, tanks, how do they repair it?
Wow. Okay. Those are always two different scenarios, right? The business turbulence that leads to a business running into credit issues versus a person, right? An individual. The individual is typically the easiest one to talk about because individual people run into credit card issues from higher level of consumerism, right? Buying things you don't need, buying things
you can't afford.
You can't afford. So I'll just define that as that and put it to the side. On the business side, it's normally business cycles that affect the business, right? Because businesses who have to hold inventory are faced with that risk all the time. And so the way they will go about fixing their credit is very different. Because think about it, they actually have some inventory, they have assets on hand that they could show that I'm just not in debt. I also have assets on hand. The valuation of the assets is relative, but it doesn't change the fact that they don't have any cash, right? Because that's the issue, they don't have any cash. So what can they do? I'm sure you've heard stories of people borrowing against their inventory, borrowing against their stocks. So if you have assets, you typically could borrow against it. You may have some business equity that you could, use as collateral. So as a business, you run somewhat different. And over time, if you have prolonged financial issue, you as a business just closes down, right? And if it's a business, it doesn't affect you personally if it's done properly, if it's structured properly. Now you've lost your business, which is a bad thing anyway, but you as a person, as a founder or owner, you don't get impacted by a business going under. So those two issues are very separate. Now, let's go back to the personal consumer debt. Very different. Consumers don't typically have any assets that they use the credit to buy, right? It's normally just shoes that, the bank is not going to want your shoes or the shirt or the flat screen TV. So they have a different issue. And I know people always say, getting into a cleanup of your credit involves going to credit bureaus, right? Luckily, we've had, I think, as the doctor said, we've had new regulations that's protecting consumers. So you can now go into credit bureaus, see what's in your credit, find out if somebody is improperly reporting something, and dispute it if, in fact, it is incorrect or inaccurate. Now, I know I'll say this for the young people. There's a lot of schemes online who want to help you clean your credit by disputing things illegally. That's not what we're talking about, right? You shouldn't do that because that's illegal. Let's start with that. We're talking about disputing things that's incorrect or inaccurate, or the little known fact that people don't use, and I wish people use this more, contacting the company to negotiate. That is a big, big tool in your box when you have a credit issue with a bank or lender. We normally try to avoid the conversation. We see the phone ring, we don't want to talk because just like the doctor said, I've been in those situations also. You see the phone ring, you see I'm not going to answer it, I don't want to talk to them. You should actually talk to them. There's nothing wrong with that.
I
you can
agree.
negotiate with them.
I agree.
They could extend, they could give you
Absolutely.
payment milestones, they could give you payment arrangements. And that way you prevent negative reports to continue, right? So there's different ways of doing it, but you want to do it the right way. Find out your credit information, go to the credit bureau, dispute things that are inaccurate, right? You have the right to do that, and call them. Normally, just go down the line, call everybody on your credit, negotiate. They could give you a forbearance. They could give you different things that could alleviate the impact to your credit. And you now have to take the liberty and responsibility to try to pay back this thing. It's not free money. You just can't ignore it. So there's different ways of going about that. The only problem is for consumers, you don't have assets, you don't have inventory, you probably buy shoes, you probably buy clothes, you probably buy a TV, and you can't pay it back. That's the problem.
And I like that you mentioned that because when you're young, right, you're offered these $1,000, you think, my goodness, I have $1,000. I can spend it, like you said, on shoes. I can buy myself the newest gaming console that's going to cost me $600. I can buy myself X, Y, and Z thing.
Right.
But we never really think, okay, I purchased this, but it wasn't free money because now really I have this $600 hole of debt,
new debt
that I gotta somehow pay back.
Right.
And if I don't pay it back, it's gonna affect me. Not even in the short term. In the long term, it affects me.
Long term.
And it also adds that stress of, man, if I can't make this payment, it's gonna drag my credit through the mud. It's gonna ruin my opportunities to finance a car. Or when you're older, right? The basic American dream is buying a house.
Yeah.
And, getting a house, you gotta go to
the
a bank.
picket fence, the car, the 1.5 or 2.5 kids, all
and
of
the
that.
little known facts, some bad credit impacts your ability to get employment because some employees check your credit.
Yeah,
I know.
at a bank.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I've already been in job situation where they actually pull my credit because it's money related. When it's financial related, they want to know that you actually have the ability to manage your own personal finance before they make you responsible for the company's finances. So it could impact your projection as an employee.
I have a question regarding the part on the repair credit. I was talking just today with Angel about a company that is called LexisNexis that I believe is within all these Bureau of Credits. Can you explain a little bit like how beneficial or how harmful can it be to, like, for instance, do a security freeze on LexisNexis? Because I understand that LexisNexis is this kind of bureau that not only report on your finances, but it reports
everything,
like insurance and all kind of
assets, employment, criminal history. So they report everything. Okay, there's no negative impact of having a credit freeze if you don't intend on seeking credit, right? And if you don't intend on being solicited by people who want to give credit. So that's an extreme situation, right? But for people who actually want credit, you can't put credit freeze because you want to engage, right? Banks, you want to engage credit card companies so you could get a good credit card deal, typically, and use it efficiently, right?
Yeah.
But when you're going the freeze route, typically people who freeze their credit is because they've been a victim of fraud, victim of identity theft. In those scenarios, absolutely, you should probably close the gate for a little bit while you do that. Now, to that scenario, I would say what you're freezing has to have a reason behind it, right? If you want to freeze your credit through LexisNexis, so be it. Freeze it. If you want to freeze your driver's license, your criminal history, whatever you want to do has to have a reason. But when it comes to credit specifically, you have to freeze it because you know you're not going to need credit or you've been a victim of identity fraud or some type of fraud to protect yourself. So it's more of a protection than actual use to build credit. You don't freeze it to build credit. You freeze it because you're protecting yourself.
Yeah.
And let's say, for instance, if you are a small business, how would you say is the best practice to use debt and credit? Like, I've worked in companies that they rather do everything on cash and they budget according to that. And there is some other companies that they say, maybe this asset, I'm going to be using it for 4 years. I don't need to decapitalize on this equipment because I can sell it after 3 years, or I can do a lease, or I can use a credit card or a credit that offers a company, let's say Apple, or let's say Microsoft, or whatever, that they have expensive assets. So, but a small business or SME, maybe,
SME, small, mid-sized enterprise.
Sometimes it's owned by either family or one person. It's not a big corporation that can get scared of getting into big debt. What's your input or your insight on that?
So when it comes to business, the main thing, I mean, as a general rule, and businesses obviously know this, as a general rule, business don't use business credit for frivolous things, right? The main word that a business owner should know and understand when it comes to this conversation about credit for business purposes is cash flow. That's the number one thing as a business owner. You can't even have, I wouldn't even have a conversation with a business owner who's talking about business credit without them understanding what their cash flow looks like. Because
and that P&L.
Right. You have to know what your P&L and your cash flow looks like, because you're saying, essentially, if you tell me you need business credit, you're saying you don't generate enough cash flow to buy whatever assets or inventory outright in cash, which is fine because large corporations who have cash flow, like Apple, right, they still use debt. They use debt to build their campuses and their buildings for a reason, even though they have the cash flow. Why is that? They believe that the interest they'll pay on the debt is going to be lower than the returns they'll make on their cash. It's just that, I mean, generally, that's what it is. So you as a business owner, you have to make those type of decisions. Like, can I get a low interest loan to buy inventory while my cash is making a higher return for me? That's a good business decision. But generally speaking, businesses have to know what their cash flow looks like, because you're making a decision. Should I pay cash and front it, less liquidity? Or should I use business loan, which has an interest rate because it's not free money? And those are the balance scales that you have to do. Now, overall, you normally invest in things as a small business, because you're not talking about a big corporation that generates revenue, right? You as a small business owner, you're not going to want to use a line of credit to build a business building, right? Because you're not that large. You're not big enough yet. So your goal is to invest in things, inventory, that could generate money for you. And then I'll go as far as saying, because I talk to businesses all the time on this, please don't take a line of credit and just hoard inventory with no track record of sales or sales orders.
Yeah.
That's another danger. It goes back to the first question you asked. That's how they run into issue, because they have all this inventory and then there's no orders. So from a business perspective, the decision is normally based on cash flow and then the returns. The returns you have on your cash versus the interest you're going to pay on your debt or the loan or line of credit.
To that matter, I would say, because that's a really good perspective of corporate, and in the personal perspective of an individual, it's kind of the same.
Yes.
Right. You don't get into debt for something without kind of calculating, okay, can I pay this back within X amount of time?
You shouldn't, but young people often do. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or people, honestly,
Human
people,
beings.
but we should, human beings, yeah.
Exactly.
But we should take the approach that you're saying. Yeah.
It's something that, if I remember, I think I read it or I heard it once. I don't remember where. It's a kind of like a principle of economics, right? That people will get into debt knowing that we can somewhat cover it, or that we can cover it within our whatever income we make. But the threshold of it going southbound is when we get into debt for something that we can't make back. Like a very prominent example has been people who get into debt with a $40,000 car, right? But they can't pay it back.
Well, you think about the economic downturn, 2008. That was strictly about debt and credit, mainly debt 100%. And what you could not afford.
Right.
I mean, so
that crazy.
When you think about, so I was in class talking to students, and so one student said that we were talking about inequity, and so one student said, well, I worked here, and so I had the same credentials as another person, and this person made more money than I did because they knew someone. And so the student was like, that's is that would you consider that inequity? And the first thing I said was, no. I say, welcome to America.
Right.
And so when you talk about, credit and debt and worthiness, I mean, we are a society, abuse or abusive is an understatement, I think. Like, we are just a greedy people. We are an entitled
consumer
people. Like, we're everything you can say.
Right.
Like, on the not so positive side, that's who we are. But having, credit, and whether it's the personal side or as a business, it's it's pivotal, right, in today's world.
Exactly.
Making the right moves, making the best decision is key. Now, I joke about, young people, but heck, the Joneses are the Joneses, right? And so whether that's at 19 or whether that's at 54, right, or 64, it is what it is. So, that's why today this is a good topic, and I definitely want for us to, and as much as we talk about the pitfalls and the downfalls, to try to give as much positive tips, in terms of how to go and where to go.
I normally use this model when I teach about credit. It's something that I came up with. So anybody speaking about this got it from me, probably. I always ask, how do you teach people how to be more self-conscious and aware of credit usage and their credit score? Is that you have to balance credit usage and credit score with the calculation of your net worth. Everybody, you could try today on your way home. What's your credit score? Everybody knows it. What's your net worth? Don't know. What's that? I never thought about that. Isn't it ironic that we know our credit score but not our net worth? It is the most disturbing thing ever for me. I don't understand how people could know their credit score. And no shade on anybody who doesn't know their net worth. But this is actually the scale. This is how the scale should be balanced. Your credit here and your net worth. Because once you know your net worth, you're more observant of how you use credit, because debt reduces your net worth.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Your income and your ability to generate revenue, cash, increase your net worth. But we know, isn't it crazy that I know Elon Musk's net worth? And you could ask around and everybody knows, oh, what's Elon Musk? Oh, it's 198 billion. Oh, so you know, okay, what's yours? I don't know. They don't know. So my teachings now focus on helping people understand their net worth and how the calculations, plus minus, impacts their behavior.
You know, I really, I love that perspective. I love the perspective. And I love, too, that you mentioned, 2008 as well as a matter of greed, because I had... I sat in for one of our professors' classes, and another professor, they were mentioning the same topics. One was talking about 2008, the other was talking about greed. In 2008, we saw a lot of people, the prime idea was, you saw subprime mortgages just blow up with CDOs and everything. And, to put it as another professor said, greed in itself is good to the extent that it pushes people to always go further, to look for more for themselves. But when it gets to, he used the word avarice, when it gets to that level where you seek more than you can actually retain, then is when it becomes a big issue.
And what discloses that to you? When you're seeking more than you could retain, when you're seeking more than you can afford, the thing that gives you the first red flag is your net worth. Right?
I love that you put it like that. I love it.
Your net worth is what helps you say, wait a minute, you're out of control. You're worth $10,000, and then you have a credit card, and you're going to buy something for whatever, $800. That's almost 10% of your net worth in a purse or in a shoe or in a TV. Nobody else would do that. It's almost impossible. Even cars. When people buy cars, they see it as, what's the largest credit line the bank is going to give me? As opposed to saying, what is the price of the car relative to my net worth?
And it's a good perspective because, for the average person who get the W-2, usually you look at your pay stub, right? And you're like, okay, I got paid X amount of money, but after being deducted, my social security tax, or federal tax, state tax if you live in a state where you have those, and that income that's left over, we would call it the net income. And based on that, you tend to calculate, okay, for the next week or the next 2 weeks, I can pay this, I can buy this amount of groceries. And it really puts you in this position, in this place to be tactful and be strategic about where you allocate your funds. So to that, I'd like to kind of start wrapping it up, and I'd like to ask, how can credit score help young people for a brighter future? Because throughout this episode, we've just mentioned building credit score, maintaining, repairing if you get into a problem, right? But also knowing to control and knowing to limit yourself and where you expend your money.
I think that's probably the number one problem, lack of control, right? Especially when so much is put in front of us. There's so much on TV, and we envy our friends, and that's kind of that's a challenge, right? Being able to control your desires, one's desires, and that's at any age. So when you're talking to young people, one of the things, or there are many things that we can say. But I think for me, like I said, I've been vulnerable. I've been very transparent. I've talked about a bankruptcy at 24 years old, right? Which was scary. I've talked about having not being able to buy something because I had no credit, and crying because no one would give me credit. So it's important that, just being able to control the desires of your heart, right? And again, if I knew then what I knew now. Somebody says to you, if I knew then what I know now. Man. If I knew then what I know now.
Completely different.
What?
Different ballgame.
Just listen. If nothing else, if I knew then what I know now. When you have bad credit, I'm not going to say you have a bad life, but it's rough.
It's rough. It's definitely rough because you need credit and something. But and I agree with the idea of if I know then what I know now, because ultimately you're saying how should people know how to behave? I think this is a very important point that the doctor just made, is that it's behavior, right? You know, I think we had a conversation last time about marketing and advertising.
Yes.
Before we get home tonight, there will be at least 40 commercials that we're all going to see that are asking us for our money.
Yes. That's within 30 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the point is, everyone's asking for your money.
Yeah.
You need to decide what you give. But you know what's worse than deciding what you give? Deciding what you want to go into debt for.
Yeah.
Because before credit card, we talk about 1950. Before 1950, before consumer credit cards, if you needed a personal loan, how did you get it? You had to go to loan sharks. So you had to walk to the loan shark. You know who they are in your neighborhood. And you need to get a loan, a personal loan that you have to pay back. And you know what the interest rate on loan sharks look like, right? Now you tell me, do you think in 1912, somebody will go to a loan shark to get a loan to buy shoes?
No, definitely not.
Not happening. Or to buy a pair of jewelry? No, really, right?
Yeah.
You had to go there out of desperation. Maybe your child was sick and you had a hospital bill. Maybe your leg is, maybe, you know, things that are so important for you that you're willing to take the risk of paying a high interest rate, also putting your life on the line too, depending on the loan shark, right?
That's for sure. You don't pay it back, you're going to end up with a leg missing or something.
Exactly.
So,
But now, because it's so accessible, we don't even think about why we're using debt. It's literally debt at a high interest rate. We're not thinking about that anymore. If this was 1912, we'd probably have a different perception about how to use debt, right? Now it's very easy. You get the card, you swipe it, boom, it's gone, it's cleared, you know, you bag it, you go home, you're done. And you have to figure out how to pay for it. But you're paying a ridiculous interest rate that reduces your ability to generate wealth. That's the story.
And that interest rate is largely dependent on what?
Your credit.
Yes.
Credit comes back.
Very good point.
Yeah.
Very
that interest rate is largely dependent upon
Isn't
the credit.
that crazy that the interest rate is charged high for people who can't afford it in the first place? Because you have bad credit? That's what we are. That's what we are.
Talk about piranha.
Oh my God.
And those are all very, very good perspectives. You know, I love how we just covered. So the history behind credit. It was made in the 50s, right? You know,
consumer.
Consumer credit
card.
And we just discussed how back then they would just send you the card if you were in college, and they'd time it.
No. Let's clean that up. Now they weren't doing that in the 50s because I wasn't around. Don't be trying.
Like in the 80s and 90s.
Don't be trying to, Angel. Don't do that, Angel.
My apologies.
I'm only I'm a woman of a certain age. Don't you dare add to that.
Don't add to it. That's in the 90s. This was in the 90s.
The 90s.
On
80s.
college campuses.
Yes. There were times sending out those cards, and you know, now we just discussed also the usages that they had, right? Back then, and you know, to modern days, they have evolved. But you know, obviously, some things have stayed the same. You're young, using your credit to buy yourself a car, stuff like that. And now we've just also discussed the matter of having a controlled mindset when you go into it, not spending everything that you get, you know, not getting yourself into such a massive debt that it outdoes your ability to generate that wealth.
Absolutely.
Eyes bigger than the pocket.
Yes.
Eyes bigger than your bank account.
That's a good one.
Eyes bigger than that pocket.
That's the pinnacle right there of business.
Right.
That's the pinnacle.
In Nigeria, we call it oju kokoro.
Really?
Yeah.
So, you know, to wrap it up, I really want to say thank you, Dr. Burt, for being here for this podcast.
A pleasure.
Thank you, Yinka, for being here, for sharing with us your expertise in finances and economics. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. You know, this episode, to recap, has been all about credit, building, maintaining, repairing if you get into that issue. And, you know, I wholeheartedly invite you to watch this episode and to watch every future episode that we'll do. We'll discuss over 401ks, retirement plans, and I also invite you to watch prior episodes where you will have seen us discuss different investment vehicles and so forth. So see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.